Hi everyone. This week we are going to be in Chapter 4 and we're going to be discussing parallelism, lists, and layouts. First of all, parallelism is as important as coherence when we're talking about creating clarity. By expressing similar information in a similar manner, or doing something in parallel, we will be making it a lot easier for readers to comprehend. This will apply to sentences, lists, and headings. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at parallelism in sentences. And I apologize in advance. The more I say the word parallel, the harder it becomes to say the word. So by the end of the lecture, I'm sure I'll be saying it in many different ways. So let's take a look at what sounds better. The first example, by logic we prove, but it is intuition that makes us discover. Versus, by logic we prove, but by intuition we discover. So looking at these two examples, which one sounds better? Why does it sound better? And you're probably thinking the second one sounds better, or hopefully you are. But what makes it sound better? And the reason it sounds better is the repetition of the grammatical structure is what makes it sound better. It expresses the same information, but logic does one thing, intuition does another. Those are equally presented, so let's take a look at a couple of others. When you are right, you cannot be too radical, but when you are wrong, it is best to be as conservative as possible. Versus, when you are right, you cannot be too radical. When you are wrong, you cannot be too conservative. So, if you're taking a look, you can see the way they're structured. They're saying the same thing, almost word for word the same thing, but the way they're structured, one's parallel, one is not. So the second one by Martin Luther King Jr. is parallel, so it sounds much better. The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessing. In socialism, the equal sharing of miseries is the inherent virtue. Versus, the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessing. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries, by Winston Churchill. So again, saying the same thing, just simply the structure. So you want to make sure that whatever you're saying in parallel, that it's balanced and that the structure is equal. So make sure that you are reviewing that structure in the book and that you are making sure that what you're saying is parallel. So the same holds true for our technical sentences. So we're going to take a look at some technical examples. Here we have runoff that is not subject to contamination can be discharged directly into the storm sewer system. When the possibility of contamination does exist, the runoff should be treated before entering the storm sewer system. Versus runoff that is not subject to contamination can be discharged directly into the storm sewer system. Runoff that is subject to contamination shall be treated before being discharged into the storm sewer system. So, as you can see, the second reads far better because of a conscious use of parallel grammatical structure to give that same information. You have two categories of runoff, and the writer is describing what needs to be done with each kind of runoff. So it's best to do that using a grammatical parallel structure. In technical writing, repetition or parallelism is oftentimes a strength. So you're not repeating yourself necessarily. You're using parallelism. So don't feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again. Oftentimes, what feels like repetition is often considered parallelism. So make sure that you're being clear. And oftentimes that's parallelism. So feel free to double check that. So let's take a look at another example. Writing and submitting proposals is time-consuming, expensive, and it involves an element of risk. Versus, writing and submitting proposals is time-consuming, expensive, and risky. So if you think about this, to be parallel, items must have the same grammatical structure. Here, you want all the items to be adjectives. And if you're saying something involves an element of risk, that's not an adjective, that's a whole phrase. So if we replace that with risky, then that means that we have all adjectives in the second sentence. So that makes it parallel. Another example, wind turbines, for all their environmental advantages, have several drawbacks, such as the amount of embodied energy, the visual impact, and they have the potential of killing birds. So, as we've said many times here in this lecture, and we're only 8 slides in, to be parallel, again, we have to have the same grammatical structure. Well, so far we've used noun phrases, but then we've got they have the potential of killing birds. So we're going to have to do something to fix that phrase. So all we need to do is clean it up and say, wind turbines, for all their environmental advantages, have several drawbacks, such as the amount of embodied energy, the visual impact, and potential bird kills. So just simply replacing it, turning into a noun phrase versus the expanded, they have the potential of killing birds, makes it parallel, gives it the same grammatical structure, and makes it work for our writing. Next, we move on to lists. Lists have 2 functions. The first is to highlight information by creating a bulleted graphic, and the second is to clarify information through parallel structure. So, where's the most important information in this report? It's pretty much impossible to tell, and this is pretty much unrelieved wash of gray. So if we're trying to draw our eye to something, all we see is just words. It's just blocks of text with some white space in between. However, in this case, where are our eyes drawn? First, we have a heading or a title, Stanford Site Inspection, but then we have a bulleted list. And this is one of the primary functions of lists, and that's to direct the reader's eyes to particular information. Of course, not all information can be listed, but in this case, the most important information, which here we're going to say is a list of deficiencies revealed by this particular inspection, has been listed for the reader's convenience. So anytime the reader returns to this document to follow up on a list of deficiencies, which are the things that have to be fixed, which was the whole point of this inspection, that list is going to jump out to that reader. So this makes the information extremely accessible. They know right where to go to it. Their eyes are drawn straight to that list. This list is now a work tool. If the report is printed out in hard copy, for example, the reader can make notes against the list. Who's responsible for the items, phone numbers, projected dates of completion, whatever might be handy, they can jot it down on the hard copy. So from this, you have one more rule. Not everything that can be formatted as a list should be. If it's not all that important, you can just put it in a series, which means sentence style, instead of stacking it as a list. So you don't want to overuse lists. Like this. In this case, everything that can be listed has been, but in the end, the reader's eyes aren't directed towards anything because there's too much to choose from. Too many lists, it's like too many all caps in an email. It pretty much screams at the reader, and in the end, nothing really stands out more than anything else. So here you've got so many bulleted lists, nothing's more important than anything else. So you want to be very selective as to what you use with your lists. Lists also clarify information. Aside from highlighting information, lists can also clarify complex information. The following information is very difficult to follow, but once it's turned into a list, the sentence structure becomes much easier to comprehend. So, if you want to take a minute and read through this massive paragraph, you certainly can. As much as I enjoy the sound of my own voice, I'm not going to read it. And now we're going to take a look at the revision. So some things I want you to take a look at. Note that all the bulleted items have a parallel grammatical structure. They're all sentence completions for the lead-in. They all begin with a verb, continue with a direct object, and so on. If the bullets are not parallel, it's not a list, but a random collection of thoughts or notes for the writer's benefit. Lists are never shortcuts. You have to put the effort into them to put them together correctly, and they're carefully crafted for the benefit of the reader. So they're not something you just slop together quickly. You have to put thought into these. What happens if you have 4 items that follow one pattern, but you can't make the 5th item fit that pattern? Well, you have to come up with a different pattern and go back and change the first 4 items. So it's that simple. They all have to work or none of them work. So let's take a look at list types. You can have full sentence lists, partial sentence lists, shopping lists, like fragments. And then if you're doing a full sentence list, criticisms leveled at wind turbines include the following, and then they have actual full sentences. So they contain a high level of embodied energy. You can read those sentences there. So some things to look at. They're going to have a lead-in, and that's going to be a full sentence. A colon at the end of the lead-in. That in punctuation serves like a period. The items have an initial capital letter and a period at the end because each item is a full independent sentence. And if the lead-in ends in the following or as following, it's a full sentence lead-in. So if not stacked, this list would be just a standard series. You have a colon as in punctuation, semicolons instead of periods, so these sentences will make sense grammatically after the colon. And a period at the end to indicate that the series is complete. So this is the most difficult of the 3 rewrites. You're rarely going to find yourself writing out such a series. You're usually going to want to use a list, but there are going to be times where you do use this. So keep in mind, if you see something like this, it will be a colon because that indicates, hey, there's a list coming. Then the semicolon indicates these full, complete phrases. And then your period indicates that the phrases or that the series is complete. Next, we have a partial sentence list. So you can take a look at it. You have your lead-in, and that's a partial sentence. People are often tempted to put a colon at the end of a lead-in here. It's not correct, but if they really want it there, you certainly could. You'll just have to know that they're wrong in a partial sentence list. But know that you're right. But if your boss wants it, obviously give that to them, but just know that you are in the right on that one. But it shouldn't be there. If it says includes, including, it's a partial sentence lead in. So here you see you've got the items complete the lead in to form a single sentence. So no initial caps and a period only at the end of the last item. If they're not stacked in a list, it would be a standard series, and the way you would punctuate that, the list makes up one single sentence, so we won't be using a colon. We never put in punctuation in the middle of a sentence, so you need to make sure that you have commas to separate the items as usual instead of the stacked bullets, and then a period at the end of the sentence. And if you have a shopping or fragment list, your lead-in is a complete sentence, in this case, abbreviated. You use a colon. The items are nouns or noun phrases. There's no initial caps and a period only at the end of the list. If you choose to use a standard series versus stacking, then make sure that you use your colon. Commas separate the items instead of bullets. And then you have the period at the end of the sentence. And next we have headings. So headings break longer documents into labeled sections, as I'm sure you're aware. The labels help readers find specific information, and the headings are meant to be scanned vertically and quickly. So only when readers have scanned their way to the section for which they are looking will they read the text with attention. So they're not trying to read everything. They're looking for what's important to them, and as soon as they use the headings to get there, then they're going to read the text. So we have a document called Proposal for West Cross Kindergarten from page 61 in the textbook, and you can see the way the proposal is organized. There are headings that essentially show how the headings act as signposts for the document's organization. It makes it very accessible. So, to make the headings easy to scan, make them parallel. They're essentially a list of topics, and you can also use phrases, not complete sentences. Phrases are a lot easier to scan. You can always make your headings as descriptive as you can. Keep in mind that with every heading, the reader will ask, what is this section about? So let's take a look at an example. Here's a heading. Consider this heading, dewatering. So dewatering is the process of getting and keeping water out of underground constructions, such as construction pits or mining tunnels. And dewatering is a very large topic at a mine, and it'll be a constant scope of work, and it's always going to be a constant subject in reports. So if I make that a heading in a report, and you see that as a heading as you're scanning, what is that actually going to be about? So you would want to make that more specific. So you would want to think about alternatives. One is a report about a success. One anticipates and seeks to overcome a future problem. Whatever the real subject is about that subject or about that section, the heading should define it clearly versus something extremely general and generic like dewatering. Dewatering is such a broad topic. It's going to be in just about any report covering this subject that it needs to be far more specific than just dewatering. So something like successful dewatering of Tunnel 3G, or need for dewatering plan for Tunnel 3G, or anticipated delays due to dewatering problems in Tunnel 3G. So one way to help make a title or subject line clear and descriptive is to indicate what kind of document you're sending. Proposal to change the tunnel lighting system to LED. Invoice for lighting installation at. Reminder about start of lighting installation. request for reimbursement for purchase of. The text itself should be independent of the heading. The headings are labels for scanning, and the text itself is actually for reading. And what that means, take a look. Here we have the heading, Need for a Dewatering Plan. Then we see the text. We need one because the hydrology of the site suggests that. So here, the text doesn't work properly because it relies on the heading to make sense. But you should consider the text completely separate of the heading. Think of writing the report first and then going back and dropping the headings as labels into the text. The text must still function completely independently of the headings, so you shouldn't view the text as a continuation of the headings. So to fix that, need for a dewatering plan. This is because the hydrology of the site suggests that. Further, need for a dewatering plan. We need a dewatering plan because the hydrology of the site suggests that. So this completely separates it, does not rely on the heading at all. You could take the heading away and it would still be clear as to what this section was talking about. Moving into levels of headings. Oftentimes report sections are broken into subsections, which may be broken into sub-subheadings. So when we do that, the headings for these sections are referred to as primary, secondary, and tertiary headings, or first, second, and third level headings. We're going to take a look at a graphic, and that's going to show a sample table of contents to illustrate different levels of headings. So here you can see progress in Tunnel 3G, exploratory drilling, initial assay results, hydrology, and then you can see further headings. So take a look here and note that font size, indentation, these clearly establish the hierarchy of the headings and the way that the report's going to be organized. So you have your primary headings, your secondary headings, and then your tertiary headings. Now we're going to look at formatting headings. Word has templates that will format heading styles for you, and most of the time you'll use these defaults. Many companies and organizations have corporate templates so their documents look uniform, and you won't have to format headings for those either. Essentially, you'll just go in and type in them. If you do need to format your own documents or want to customize a template, just keep in mind there are some things that you don't want to do. Things like capitals and underlines or throwbacks to like days of typewriters when people had no way to create contrast to body text. These days they're considered anachronisms and eyesores, so you probably want to stay away from those. Italics tend to make text harder to read. You should only use italics in specific circumstances. And in this day and age with ADA pushes and things like that, you want to make sure that your documents are accessible, and headings and things like that are very important. So you want to make sure that you're not doing things incorrectly. So if there is a template out there, make sure that you're using it. So again, don't use all caps, italics, or underlines. They're considered dated and unattractive, and they're harder to read. Think about whether or not you should use color for headings if you're not in control of output. If you're using color to indicate meaning, that's generally a no-no as far as being ADA compliant. So keep that in mind. You're not 100% sure who in your audience may or may not be able to understand visually what you're putting out. So it may be not a great idea to use that. There are ways to create emphasis. You can use bold if need be. You can use font sizes. You can indent. The smaller the font size and the more indenting and heading, the less emphasis there is on it. And then also you can use numbered headings on longer documents for ease of reference. Word can automate these for you as well. Keep in mind too that you can always use different typefaces for headings and body text. For example, text in Verdana, which is sans serif, meaning without the little lines. Text in Times New Roman, which is with serifs, and those are the little extra lines that you see there, like on the S's and things. Fun fact, Times New Roman was created for the New York Times so they could squeeze more text onto a page, which is a major cost savings for them, but still be legible. So those are without the serifs, and those are with serifs. For our report, please stick to Times New Roman. And in conclusion, some things as we're wrapping up. Always aim for parallel structure for similar parallel information. This helps with comprehension in series, lists, and in balanced sentences. In lists and series, this means creating a parallel grammatical structure for all items. Use headings as signposts so readers can see at a glance how information is organized and where to look for specific information. Format headings for proper emphasis depending on their level, and treat headings like lists of topics. Make them parallel. Thank you, and as always, please reach out if you have any questions. Have a great week.